All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about different graphics you can use within your website. So some of the different graphics you can use here are PNG, JPEG, GIF, and then SVG, which is more of a modern approach to basically implementing images into your website. And you'll see one of the cool things is that you can animate these SVGs. You can get them to automatically scale according to the browser. And we'll talk about some different resources where you can actually find some of these graphics. But let's jump back. The PNG is really ideal for logos. And the cool feature about it is that it supports this transparency feature. And so if you go to MPLS renders here, let me just refresh. You'll see that the logo for this site here, MPLS, is a PNG. So if I were to change this background image or background color, this logo is going to allow that background color to bleed through the logo. So if I were to inspect here, and let's just go and just do a quick example of this here. Let's just actually change the body of this website and say background color. Let's just say gray. Right, so if I change the whole body of my background to gray, this logo is still allowing that gray color to come through the logo. And so that's one of the cool features of PNG. GIF allows you to do the same thing. And again, PNG was created to overtake or to replace GIF, but GIF has made its way back into the forefront with a lot of social media sites and so forth. JPEG is used for a lot for photography. So if you're going to have images in your site where somebody has done some photography of something, you want to include those images into your site, you want to use JPEG. It has a lot more colors that can be expressed through the image. And so even if you see it in this image here, right, there's a lot of different things. There's a level of clarity that can be implemented within a JPEG. Allows for higher compression. The lower the image, and then like I said, it's really focused on this idea of quality and making sure that the image is expressed in a certain way, given the depth of color tone that can be expressed. GIF, again, like I said, this was meant to go away, but again, we're in 2020 at the time of the recording of this video, and GIFs are at an all-time high, and reason being is because they're very lightweight. There's only so many colors that can be expressed within a GIF, which actually basically contributes to why they're so lightweight. But the cool thing about GIFs is that they can be interlaced to kind of create some animations. So there's a link here that goes that allow you to basically stitch on a variety of different images to create some type of animation, as you see here with Kermit the Frog. But nonetheless, like I said, they're lightweight, they're fast to load up in the browser, and you can do this animation functionality with GIFs. And then SVG, watch what happens here when I click on this image here. All right, and so SVGs are really a lot of web developers and front-end engineers are gravitating to SVG. Because it can pretty much do everything that the previous file formats can, what they're known for. But also it allows for a level of responsibility, having the images to be responsive. And so here in MPLS renders, refresh, you'll see that these graphics here, I created these using SVGs, and SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphic. And so here's a tag called SVG in HTML. You can also, SVG, behind the SVG is nothing but what we call XML. And I'm not going to get into the details of how to create an SVG. A lot of times you would use some external software such as Illustrator. You would export it from Illustrator, and you would then include that SVG into your site. You can include the direct code, such as what you see here. If I right click and then let's say edit as HTML. So here's all the code for this SVG graphic, right? Or you can create a separate file and put this code into a separate file and then link to it using the image tag. And so it'd be something such as IMG, right? You have to use the source attribute and give the relative file path, but the extension to that SVG would be .svg. Again, SVGs are becoming very popular. You can do pretty much everything you can do with the previous file formats that I mentioned. And a huge benefit is that they're responsive. They allow your, they'll scale with your site. And so if I were to reduce this here, let's say if I were to squeeze down, you'll see that my SVG is actually it's actually rewriting or re-rendering as I scale down the browser. And that's one of the benefits of using SVG. So let's keep moving here. Here's a few sites that you can go and find some free stock photos. And so let's just look at one here. Let's go to Pexels. And I would encourage you to use this. And I mentioned this in previous videos in terms of when you were doing your high fidelity wireframes, you may want to use some of these different resources here. So Pexels, let's say your site was on, your site was on oceans, right? You can go here and find some graphics. You can download these graphics. And typically the pictures that you get from these resources are open source, and you can use them within your site without giving attribution. But although it may still be it may be good to still give attribution here, but most of the photos on this site here you can use free of charge. There's another, also using icons in your site. In the video I'm going to show you next, it's going to talk about the use and the benefit of using some graphics and icons and images in your site, and how that actually really allows your site, it adds some visual appeal to your site and helps it stand out and helps the end user perceive your content a little bit better. But nonetheless, here's some links to some different resources for finding some graphics and icons. So let me refresh here real quick and go. I think there's a video here. Let me scroll to it. There it is. All right, so go ahead and pause this video and watch this video. It talks about images and graphics and how you can use those to enhance the visual appeal of your interface. And then we'll pause and we'll talk about a few more things, and then we'll wrap up this video here. So here's the image tag, and here's some different attributes. We're already familiar with the alt and the width attribute, but there's a few other attributes we can use, such as the height. And typically when you're using the width and the height attribute, you just only want to give the value, right? You never want to say 300 and then use the measurement unit pixels, right? It's implied that pixels is it's implied that pixels is there when you put the value 300. You want to be very careful when you're using width and height, because you want to make sure that you keep the image in its right proportions. So the width and height aspect ratio. And so if you were to put height, right, when you do width, the height is automatically going to adjust accordingly to keep the picture true to its aspect ratio. And then the same thing if you do height, the width is going to automatically adjust to keep the width and height aspect ratio in proportion. So if we say 300 for the height, the width will automatically adjust. So be very careful when you're using both width and height, because you may distort the picture. So for example, if we say width and we say 100, right, this image is going to start to look a little distorted, and we don't want that, right? So do your best to keep the graphic in proportion with the true height and width aspect ratio. And the way to do that is, if you're going to use width, leave out height. If you're going to use height, leave out width. Title, here's some information. You can actually do a pop-up tool to give attribution to where you got that image from. You can give some additional information about it. Also, if somebody's using a screen reader, it's going to read out the title attribute as well. So just a few additional tags we can apply to our web page. So let me just talk about background images here, and then we'll wrap up this video. All right, with background images, you'll see that you apply background via the CSS style rule. And so let's do an example of this here. So here, if you were to right click, let me just actually show you the code behind this graphic here. And so what we do is we have a box called BG. If you see, if my mouse is hovering, it's called BG box. And what's going to happen is that when I click on each of these particular checkboxes, it's going to add a CSS style, a CSS declaration. So to add background color, right, that's how we would add background color. We had the CSS property, and then we give it the RGB value, which we talked about in the previous video. To do background image here, right, we're going to add a background image, and you would use the CSS property background image. and you will give it the relative file path. Now the default behavior whenever you add a background image into the CSS style rule is that it's going to repeat on the X and Y axis, and that's why it's showing so many different Bears logo. But in essence, it's only one Bears logo that looks like this here in my right lower hand corner. But the default behavior is that it's going to repeat on the X and Y axis. Now there's some CSS properties that can control that, such as the background repeat X. And so if you only want it to repeat on the X axis, right, you can use this CSS property here, right? And so here, that's an example of that. And then if we want to do the Y axis, the vertical, you do Y. We can also position the background image, and let's kill that for a moment. We can position it in certain ways within our available space of this box element. And so we can click here and position it as center. And then we can also change the background size, right? So we can change the size of the background image by using the background size property. And we can say background size, and then we can say cover, or we could say contain. Now, let me talk about the difference between cover and contain. Cover is going to cover the width aspect ratio of whatever is contained within. And then contain, if you give it the value contain here, it's going to basically cover the height aspect ratio. And so cover, again, is width. Contain is going to take up the full height. You can also apply multiple background images. So watch this here. So in this case here, I have a bear and I have a Viking. All right. And so how do you do that? You can, so for the background image, you can actually give it multiple images, but you just have to separate it with a comma. And so if I were to put another comma here and do another I'll do another comma here and enter and do another URL, I can put in a third background image, right? But in this case, I don't have a third background image at this moment. So, but just to give you an idea that you can add multiple background images in, but the thing is, the trick here is that you have to put in a comma, and then I can also style each one of these background images by saying background repeat. This first repeat goes for this graphic here. The second repeat goes for this here, right? For background size, the 50% goes for this image here. The 30% goes for this image here. And then likewise for the background position. The top left goes for this image here, and then the bottom center goes for this graphic here. So that's a little about background images, right? I would say play around with these properties here. Go to CodePen or create a new project folder and download a graphic and begin to play with how to add background images to your various box elements to kind of create some visual appeal to your site. In the next video, we're going to talk about typography and font and how to apply some CSS properties, but then also how to include an external font into our web page. Stay tuned.